glad to see you all here on time. It's not easy parking around here, and this building's a bit of a rabbit warren. Anyways, it's good you've all managed to get here. Before we begin, I must ask each and every one of you to forget everything that you have read or heard about this case. Yes, everything. It is you alone who have been called here to judge this matter. You are the lay judges, the members of the public who today will sit in judgment on the defendant, Lars Koch. The law grants you the power to determine the fate of a human being. Please, take this responsibility seriously. You will judge solely what you hear here in this courtroom. We lawyers describe this as evidence gained from within the hearing itself. That means only what is said by the defendant, the witnesses, the joint plaintiff, and the legal experts in this courtroom. Only the evidence which we gather here may provide the basis for your verdict. At the end of the trial, you will be obliged to vote, and I shall announce the verdict which you have reached. In court proceedings, we reenact the events. The court is a stage. Of course, we're not going to perform a play. We're not actors. We will be reenacting the events through language. This is our way of understanding them, and it is one which has stood the test of time. Hundreds of years ago, the judges used to meet in a special place, one which was considered sacred, the ting. In those days, to pronounce judgment meant to resolve disorder and restore order once again. Whenever harm was done, an attack by an enemy tribe, for example, this was always the place where it would be resolved and discussed. A rape, a murder, a hut burned to the ground. Our ancestors knew that in this way, evil can lose its horror. Will we achieve this today? I'm not sure, but we have to try. A judge does not regard anything as evil. His or her verdicts are not hell and damnation, but acquittal, prison, or preventive detention. So make your judgments calmly and in your own time. And above all, remember that before you there is a human being. Someone with the same dreams as you, the same needs. He too, just like you, is trying to find happiness. And that is why in your judgment, you should retain your own humanity. Now, I'd like to begin, but we are still waiting on the defense counsel. He's late. I don't know why. I've conducted many trials with him in the past. He is a serious man, but stubborn, willful, and above all, tardy. Oh, I've just been told he's finally arrived, so let us begin. The defendant, Mr. Lars Koch, has been delivered here from custody. The court has therefore been assembled with all those present who are listed in the notice to appear. So far, so good. Are there any questions or motions?
I would like Mr. Koch to sit here next to me.
Yes, I don't think he's a risk to anyone's safety. Sergeant, please. name, please.
Lars.
And your date of birth?
14th March, 1989. I'm 31 years old.
Are you married?
Yes.
Do you have any children from or outside of this marriage?
One son, Boris. He's 2. No other children.
And you live in Berlin?
Amsterdam 56 in Stieglitz.
Mr. Koch, you're a major in the Air Force. You're currently being held in custody and have been relieved of your duties. Is that correct?
My client's employer, the Army, is waiting for the outcome of this trial before making a final decision.
Thank you. Personal details are the same as on page 159, volume 1 of the Ling files. Does the court have any more questions about the defendant's personal details? Fine. If there are no further questions or motions, I will now ask the state prosecutor to read out the charge.
Can we open a window? The air is terrible in here.
You're right. We've had this problem for days. Apparently the ventilation system's broken, but if we open a window, there's too much noise.
From the street?
It's so loud, you can't even hear yourself think.
I have no trouble with that as it is.
I beg your pardon?
Never mind.
But would you please put on your gown, Mr. Biegler?
Oh, I hadn't noticed. Robes.
Robes? I don't understand.
The gowns. Well, you know. In 1726, Frederick William I declared that all lawyers were to wear dark gowns. His exact words were, so you could see the robes coming from a long way off. He had a point, the old king. Our colleagues are rather hard to take sometimes.
Are you ready now, Mr. Biegler?
Yes.
Fine. And prosecutor, the charge, please.
Lars Koch, whose personal details have just been specified, is charged under the German Criminal Code according to section 154A, paragraph 1 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, that on the 26th of May 2019, above the village of Uber Upper Store, he did use deadly force to kill 164 people. The charge states that on 26th of May 2019 at 20:21 hours, using an air-to-air guided weapon system, he did shoot down a passenger aircraft, type A320-100/200, manufactured by Airbus Industries, belonging to Lufthansa German Airlines, which was at that time flying from Berlin to Munich, under flight code LH2047, and did thereby kill the 164 persons on board. He is charged with the crime of murder, according to section 211, paragraph 2, group 2, variant 3.52, paragraph 1 of the German Criminal Code.
Thank you. The charge has been referred unamended by a decision of the Chamber on the 28th of February this year on page 256 in volume 6 of the main files. Mr. Koch, in this trial you are accused of multiple murder. I am obliged to instruct you as the defendant. You may defend yourself by speaking or by remaining silent. You are not obliged to give any testimony. If in the face of the charges raised against you, you remain silent, the court cannot and shall not use your silence against you. Have you understood the charge and my instruction?
Yes.
Very well. You certainly have already discussed this with your defense counsel. In the preliminary proceedings, you gave a full confession. How do you wish to proceed today? Will you give testimony here?
I shall make a statement on behalf of the defendant.
Fine, but you may remain seated.
Oh, you know I prefer to stand. The dignity of the court.
If it helps us get at the truth, very well.
Ladies and gentlemen, every one of us knows where we were on 11th September 2001. And everyone knows where they saw those pictures for the first time. Of the 2 planes which flew into the World Trade Center in New York, the 3rd which exploded by the Pentagon, and the 4th which crashed into a field near Pittsburgh. We can all see those people in front of us jumping to their deaths from a burning skyscraper. This was a terrorist act of mass murder. 18 months later, a man here in Germany hijacked a light aircraft. He circled over Frankfurt and threatened to crash into the headquarters of the European Central Bank. This triggered a major security alert, and Frankfurt city center was evacuated. In the event everything ended peacefully, the man landed and gave no resistance to his arrest. But we had learned something from this incident. That we had finally understood that we need to protect ourselves, and therefore in 2005, a new law was passed, the Aviation Security Act. Our parliament was agreed that if the worst did happen, the Minister of Defense would be entitled to decide to use armed force, even against a passenger plane with innocent people on board. Even in the worst case scenario, therefore, a hijacked aircraft could be shot down. The vast majority of our members of parliament voted for this law. It allowed the state to kill people who have not committed a crime, but are its victims. You can imagine the endless debates that there were in Parliament. A year after this law was passed, the Federal Constitutional Court revoked the most significant paragraphs of this legislation. The Federal Constitutional Court is our Supreme Court. All powers of the state are bound by its decision, and this court decreed that it was unconstitutional to kill innocent people in order to save other innocent people. One life should never be weighed against another. You, ladies and gentlemen, are the judges who have to come to a decision today. What happened is as follows. A terrorist hijacked a light aircraft. He wanted to fly it into a football stadium and kill 70,000 people. But one man, this man, had the courage and the power to act. He shot down that plane and all 164 people died. And that is the charge that has been brought. The state prosecutor is correct. Lars Koch did do this. He killed the people on that plane. Men, women, and children. He weighed it up. The lives of 164 innocent people against the lives of 70,000 innocent people. Lars Koch did do this, and we will do nothing to cover that up. But that is not the end of this trial, ladies and gentlemen. That is the beginning. There are 182 main files, 154 supplementary files, 45 folders of evidence, 15 files of photographs, all material relating to this case. And my client has been in custody now for 10 months. He has not seen his children in all that time. His wife is allowed to visit him once a fortnight for half an hour. But the only question in this case, the only question that has been asked of you today is, was Lars Koch permitted to kill 164 people? Are there situations in our lives where it is right, proper, and prudent to kill people? And indeed, when to do anything else would be absurd and even inhuman. Now, there are cases like this where it is necessary to act. Of course, they are so frightened just to make us question ourselves, but to believe they do not exist because they are not allowed to exist, well, that is not only naive, it's dangerous. In fact, it is very dangerous. There is no alternative. We need to accept that we live in a world where the most terrible and unimaginable things become real a long time ago. And we have to accept that there are limits to the principles of our Constitution, and it is your job, ladies and gentlemen, as judges, your duty to recognize this reality and take account of it. And I am confident that if you do so, and if you do so fairly, that you will find Lars Koch not guilty. You will find him not guilty because he acted. You will find him guilty, not guilty, even though he killed 164 people. Your Honor, Prosecutor, ladies and gentlemen judges, Lars Koch accepts the claims made in the charge. He admits that everything is accused of happened exactly as it has been described. Yes, the facts, they are correct. And this but is the only thing that matters. It was not murder. The legal conclusions which the prosecution has drawn are wrong.
Mr. Koch, having understood your defense counsel correctly, you accept the external series of events.
I beg your pardon?
The facts. Are the facts correct of which you are accused in the charge?
Yes.
Good. However, we would like to know more about the sequence of events. We would like to hear from you about your motives. A blanket confession is not enough for us. Are you prepared to answer the questions of the court?
My client will make no further statement.
What about later?
No, we plan to, yes.
Very well. As you wish, counsel. Then, let us begin hearing the evidence. Sergeant, could you please see whether the witness, Lieutenant Lauterbach, is correct?
Lauterbach, Christian Lauterbach.
Counsel, prosecutor. As you can see from this list, I've only called this one witness because the defendant already admitted to the deed in the preliminary proceedings. It seemed to me that we might dispense with any further witnesses. Of course, you can always add to this list after you've heard Mr. Lauterbach's statement if you consider it necessary, and there will be no need to make any formal motions. I will take a very generous view of it.
That would be a first.
Excuse me?
You being generous.
I beg your pardon.
My client has been in custody for 10 months now. You could have released him. No, he wasn't a flight risk. You can't talk about being generous.
I can't believe that we accused of murder.
Judge, counsel, please.
This is about saying please. Look, it's not my job to be polite. Defending cases of criminal law is not a popularity contest.
Good morning. You are Christian Lauterbach?
Yes, good morning.
Mr. Lauterbach, I have to start by instructing you that as a witness, you are obliged to tell the truth here. You are not allowed to add anything or omit anything. False testimony is punished very severely. You can be required to be put on oath. Do you understand?
Yes,
Please state your personal details for the record.
my name is Christian Georg
Speak
Lauterbach.
up a little, please.
Yes,
And you go by the name of Christian.
yes,
Your age, last birthday, please.
I'm 49.
Where do you live?
In Georg, it's on the lower
Yes,
line.
thank you. Are you related to the defendant either by birth or by marriage?
No,
Your profession
soldier,
and rank?
Lieutenant Colonel.
Thank you. We have a form here from the Army giving their permission for you to testify. According to this, you may refuse to answer any questions relating to state secrets. Is that correct?
That is the case.
In the event that I or anyone else in this courtroom, in the course of this hearing, asks you about state secrets and you are not permitted to answer those questions, you must draw this to our attention. You are not allowed simply to give evasive answers. Do you understand this too?
Yes, I do.
We are concerned with the 26th of May last year. Please describe the events of that day from your personal point of view.
I was on the duty rota as DC from 1400 hours. That's the second shift.
DC?
Duty controller.
As a matter of principle, Mr. Lauterbach, we are in a courtroom here and not in the Air Force. The lay judges have not read your files, and we are not all familiar with your terminology. You're going to have to explain all these military terms to us. What is the task of a duty controller?
The DC is an Air Force staff officer. Do you want me to go into the technicalities?
Please do.
German airspace is supervised by NATO. The entire air defense system is under their control. However, if an airplane is hijacked in German airspace, NATO's jurisdiction ends and the command is transferred to the so-called National Airspace Security Situation and the Command Center.
Complicated. So, normally, NATO watches over our airspace, but the national defense system is activated for hijackings.
You can put it that way, yes.
Who is employed at this command center?
Staff from the Ministry of Defense, in other words, Air Force personnel.
And apart from that?
There are also officials from the Ministry of the Interior, Ministry of Transport, Construction and Urban Development, and the Federal Office of Civil Protection and Disaster Assistance.
How many people altogether?
Between 60 and 65.
And where is this command center located?
In Udam in North Rhine-Westphalia, along with the NATO Combined Air Operations Center.
And that's where you were on duty on the 26th of May?
Yes.
Could you please explain to us in precise detail how airspace is monitored?
We use both primary and secondary radar. We also have access to all the data from the Civil Aviation Security and the state and federal police. We also receive some secret service information relevant to the air traffic, and all of this is put together to give us an overview of the situation.
I see.
We are constantly on the lookout for renegade.
Renegade?
That refers to a civilian aircraft which has been hijacked in the air. We call that renegade. It's the internationally accepted term.
Very well then. Renegade. How do you hear about a case like this?
That is the most difficult part of our job. What we do is stay in radio contact with every aircraft and look for irregularities.
Such as?
An airplane going off course, or the automatic recognition system being switched off, or simply being unable to make radio contact.
Does that happen very often?
Every day, 3, 4, 5 times. They are hardly ever hijackings. Still, we need to check on every single one and then make a decision.
I see.
On 26th of May, it was very straightforward though.
Straightforward. Why?
The terrorist forced the pilot to announce over the radio that he had hijacked the airplane.
Could you be more precise, please?
At 1932, we received a radio transmission from Lufthansa flight Lima Hotel 2047. This was the flight from Berlin-Tegel to Munich, departing 1920, landing 2030. The pilot said he was being forced to read a text aloud.
What was this text?
With the grace of God, I have this plane in my power. You shall die as we have died.
In those exact words?
Yes, those were the words. And then the pilot said that the terrorist wanted to crash the aircraft into the football stadium in Munich. He was referring to the Allianz Arena. That day there was an international match there, Germany versus England. The whole stadium was sold out. 70,000
You
spectators.
heard him say that on the radio yourself.
Yes, it's recorded. All radio transmissions are saved. And I then put it on the loudspeaker so that everyone in the room could hear.
Did the terrorist reveal his identity?
We only found that out later. He was a suicide bomber belonging to a splinter organization.
That is not something you know from your own inquiries, is it?
No, from the Federal Criminal Police. And then the newspapers. As I said, that was until much later.
What did you do after you had heard what was said on the radio?
I informed everyone in the room.
Yes, you put the message on the loudspeaker. You've already said that. I mean, after that.
Right. I initiated a sequence of calls to all the NATO command centers. At the same time, I informed the commander of the Air Force, Lieutenant General Rathke.
Who is he?
He is the most senior general in the Air Force. I reported to him.
And that's usual practice.
Yes, it's also stated in the official regulations.
Go on.
I gave the order for the Rapid Reaction Force to be deployed and to establish visual contact with the Lufthansa aircraft.
And what is a rapid reaction force?
Two fighter aircrafts of the Eurofighter type, they're on constant standby. One unit is stationed in the north in Wittmund in East Frisia, and the other is in the south in Neuburg on the Danube. The fighters from Wittmund were airborne at the time. It took them 11 minutes to reach the Lufthansa aircraft.
That's very fast, isn't it?
It's normal, our airspace isn't that big.
Fine. Who were the pilots? I mean, the pilots of the Rapid Reaction Force.
Major Koch and First Lieutenant Weinberger. The Rapid Reaction Force is generally staffed so that an older, more experienced pilot will fly together with a younger one. Major Koch is 31 years old and First Lieutenant Weinberger 25.
I see. Let's go back to a telephone call with Lieutenant General Radke.
Yes.
What were his orders?
The first thing that General Radke wanted to know was whether the Rapid Reaction Force already had visual contact with the Lufthansa aircraft.
What was your answer?
After the fighters had caught up with the Lufthansa aircraft, it was possible to establish visual contact. The officers reported being able to see a man dressed in civilian clothes in the cockpit. This man was between the pilot and the co-pilot. Radio contact was no longer possible as the devices on board the Lufthansa aircraft had been switched off.
And that's when you passed on.
Yes.
What were Radke's orders then?
To divert the Lufthansa aircraft off course and force it to land.
What exactly did he say to you?
Intervention. The order was intervention, that means forcing it off course.
Intervention.
Yes, at the same time, all the staff in the control center were looking for an airfield where they could make a landing. We have contingency plans at certain airfields for cases like these.
So you passed on the order?
Yes, immediately.
Just that one word?
Yes, military language is concise. There was no need for more.
But as far as I can tell from the files, the Lufthansa plane did not react.
That's right. It maintained its course.
What happened next?
I reported this to General Radke and I gave him the additional details.
What details?
That we were dealing with the Lufthansa aircraft of the Airbus Alpha 320-200 type, that in addition to the terrorist, there were 164 passengers on board. How many of those belonged to the crew? Its speed, its estimated time of impact, those sort of things, details.
And where had you got these details from?
From my colleagues in civil aviation security, for example. There were 98 men, 62 women, and 2 children.
Excuse me, I couldn't understand you.
I said there were 2 children in the aircraft.
Well, what orders did you receive from General Radke?
It took about 6 minutes. In a case like this, General Radke has to call the Minister of Defense and inform him of the situation. At the same time, he is in contact with Army Supreme Commander. But General Radke made the Minister of Defense a proposal. That is his duty. The Minister then decides whether he is going to follow this proposal. That is what's written in the aviation security law and in the official regulations.
What did General Radke propose?
For cases like these, there's a series of steps laid down in advance. Step 1, divert the plane, and step 2, warning shots.
That means?
The minister orders the unit to fire warning shots.
Well, can't the pilots decide that for themselves?
To fire warning shots?
Yes.
No, only the minister is allowed to do that.
Very well. Warning shots. Did you receive this order? That the pilots should now fire the warning shots?
Yes.
What happens there, these warning shots?
That is going to get technical now, Your Honor.
Well, explain anyway. We'll do our best to follow.
The Eurofighter is equipped with a single-barrel gas-operated 5-chamber revolver cannon made by Meiser. The weapon is mounted in the right wing. Its rate of fire is 1700 rounds per minute, traveling with a velocity of 1.025 meters per second, which means over 4 kilograms of ammunition is fired in 0.5 seconds. It has a range of around 1600 meters. For airborne targets, it is usually loaded with high explosive ammunition. I passed the order onto the rapid reaction force. Warning burst, that's what we call it. In military language, I mean.
Who fired these shots?
Major Koch.
Did you decide who would fire these shots?
No, the pilots decide that themselves, but it is customary for the senior officer to do so.
The defendant, in other words.
That's right.
And what happens next? Does a captain of a civilian aircraft even notice these warning shots?
Of course, he can see the gun smoke and hear the shots, and he can see the path of the tracer bullets.
Was there a reaction of any kind?
No. And if I may say so, warning shots like these are very impressive. It takes quite a lot not to react to them.
I understand. In your military experience, are there any other ways of diverting an airplane?
You mean other than warning shots and diversion?
Yes.
No, I'm afraid not.
You're afraid not.
Anyone else would say the same.
What did you do next?
I reported back to General Rathke again.
And then?
General Rathke took a couple of minutes to reply. During that time, he had proposed to the Minister of Defense that the Lufthansa aircraft be shot down.
Then?
That's the final step. But the Minister of Defense rejected it.
How do you know that?
The General told me.
Did the General make any comment on the Minister's decision?
What do you mean?
For example, did he say, unfortunately, he rejected it?
No.
Had you expected that to be the Minister's decision?
Yes. We all know the views of the Federal Constitutional Court.
You mean the ruling which decreed part of the aviation security law to be unconstitutional?
Yes. At the time, everyone in the team had talked about it.
I understand. So you passed the decision on to the pilots?
What?
That they were not allowed to fire warning shots?
Yes, of course.
And what happened there?
Nothing.
Nothing. I don't understand.
Well, we just stared at the screens. There was nothing else we could do. Everyone was hoping for a miracle. I was.
Did you question the Minister's decision or the General's order, or did you simply...
It is not my job to question orders.
So you passed on the instructions exactly as you have received them?
Yes.
I see. I am trying to imagine the situation. You're now looking at your screens and waiting. How long did that go on for approximately?
28 minutes.
That long?
Yes.
So almost half an hour?
Yes.
And then?
Major Koch.
The defendant?
He asked twice whether he had understood everything correctly.
The order that he was not allowed to shoot?
Yes. The order to shoot down the aircraft is engaged. I confirmed to him both times that no such order had been given.
Did you have a clear connection? Did the defendant understand you properly?
Yes, Yes, he repeated it himself. I'm sorry, could I have a glass of water, please?
Sorry, should I got a glass of water for the witness?
Thank you.
Are you ready to continue?
Yes.
Good. So the defendant asked us. Then what happened?
The next thing was Major Koch reported that the Lufthansa aircraft had begun its descent.
How far away were the planes from the stadium?
Around 25 kilometers.
Had the Lufthansa aircraft changed its course at all during the entire time?
No. Then Major Koch shouted into the microphone.
He shouted?
Yes.
What did he shout?
If I don't shoot now, thousands of people are going to die.
Were those the exact words?
Yes.
And then?
I saw on my screen that Major Koch had fired the Sidewinder.
And what is a sidewinder?
Ammunition.
Presumably things are going to get technical again.
It's an air-to-air guided missile type Alpha India Mike -9 Lima/India Sidewinder.
And how does it work?
It has an infrared sensor. It homes in on heat sources.
And that's exactly what happened.
The heat seeker locked onto the right engine of the aircraft. The plane crashed into a potato field.
What time was that?
2021. Wait a moment. Let me just check. Yes, at precisely 21 hours and 34 seconds. That was the moment when the Sidewinder was released electronically.
And the rapid reaction force?
Major Koch had said into the microphone that there was no alternative. The two fighters turned away and flew back to the airbase. Major Koch was arrested after he had landed. Our colleagues from Federal Criminal Police had, of course, called the emergency services. They secured the scene and searched the wreckage for survivors. Nobody survived.
Did you have any means of preventing the weapon from being fired from the command center?
How?
Blocking it by radio, perhaps?
No, there's no way of doing that. The pilots can and must have independent control of their own weapon system.
I understand. So the matter lay exclusively in his hands?
Yes.
And are the planes always armed?
They are fighter jets. Of course they're armed.
Did you report to General Radke that a weapon had been fired?
Of course.
How did he react?
Not at all.
I beg your pardon?
Well, he simply received the message. What was going on inside him, I don't know. He did, however, order that all the recordings of the incident should be secured and that Major Koch should be handed over to the Federal Police without delay.
Yes, well, for my part, I have no further questions for the witness. The facts appear to lie clearly before us. They consist of the defendant's confession on every single point. Does anyone else in the court have any questions for the witness? Prosecutor.
I have no questions for the witness.
Counsel for the defense. Any questions?
No, I don't have any questions either.
Fine. Are there any motions to place the witness under oath? If not,
I do have a question after all.
Yes, of course.
Mr. Lauterbach, just very briefly, at the beginning of your testimony, you said that everyone in the room knew that the plane had been hijacked?
Yes.
Among you, there were officials from the Federal Police, the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Transport, Disaster Assistance, and so forth?
That is correct.
Who in the room decided to evacuate the stadium?
Evacuate the stadium?
Yes, who ordered that?
I don't know.
Try to remember, please. We do have time.
I have no idea.
Really?
I honestly don't know.
Well, then you're in the same position as me, because I don't know either. And do you know, Mr. Lauterbach, do you know why I don't know?
No.
The reason I don't know is because nobody did make that decision. No one.
But
Not a single person in your command center gave the order to clear the stadium at any time. Now, the question I have is a very simple one. Why not? Why was the order not given? Mr. Lauterbach?
Yes.
We are waiting.
Well, we didn't have time for that.
Really?
Yes.
So there was no time. If I look here at the timings that you have given us, then from the first radio signal at 1932 to the estimated impact of the aircraft at 2024, there was time. 52 minutes of time to be precise.
52 minutes?
Yes, 52 minutes. I have here in front of me the evacuation plan for the stadium, page 438 from volume 19. According to this, at full capacity, the entire stadium can be evacuated completely within 50 minutes. In 52 minutes, therefore, or probably almost all of the people would have been able to leave the stadium. Perhaps there might have been 100 people left inside. Perhaps they would also manage to get out.
100.
There is no need to repeat everything I say. I just want to know why nobody ordered the stadium to be cleared.
That is
Was
because...
that perhaps the case that you and your colleagues were quite simply certain?
Certain? Certain about what?
Certain that Major Koch would shoot the plane.
No.
I'll ask you again, was it not the case that the only reason you did not evacuate the stadium was because you knew that if the worst came to worst, the defendant would shoot?
No.
No? Think again before you answer. You can be put on oath here, as the presiding judge has already reminded you.
Yes, possibly.
Speak out a little, please. The acoustics in this room are very poor.
I could imagine that.
What exactly could you imagine?
That Major Koch would shoot.
And why could you imagine that, Mr. Lauterbach?
Because there was...
perhaps the case that you yourself would have also shot the plane down?
No. I don't know. Do I have to answer that question?
Well, I can't see how you might incriminate yourself by giving a truthful answer.
What?
You do have to answer the question.
I don't know.
Perhaps I can help you, Mr. Lauterbach. Are you aware that the former Minister of Defense, Ling, said that despite presuming at the Federal Constitutional Court, he would still order hijacked passenger planes to be shot down? Yes or no?
Yes, I am aware of that remark.
You said, and I quote, "In the intervening period, we would act by declaring an extra-legal state of emergency."
Yes, I did read that.
Was this discussed within the team?
Of course, it was the topic of discussion.
A topic of discussion?
Everyone in this team is constantly thinking about what is going to happen in the event of renegade.
And do you also remember that the defense minister said that only those pilots would be selected who were prepared to shoot a plane down in an emergency?
I'm also aware of that.
So was that ultimately the reason? Was that why no one thought of evacuating the stadium? Think this through one more time. You knew how Major Koch would react, weren't you?
I don't know what to say. I was not prepared for that question.
It sure could be helpful.
I assume that most of my colleagues would act precisely as Major Koch did. Yes, I too would probably have shot down the Lufthansa aircraft.
There we are.
What are you getting at?
So not evacuating the stadium was a gamble, Mr. Lauterbach.
I beg your pardon?
You were gambling. You gambled the lives of 70,000 people on the defendant's decision.
That's cynical.
Cynical? Why is that cynical?
I assure you, I was not gambling.
Mr. Lauterbach, if you had had the stadium cleared, 100 people would have been killed. Probably fewer, possibly nobody at all. And you would therefore have achieved your objective without killing a single person aboard that plane. But evidently you did not want to do that.
For God's sake! I didn't want to do that.
Yes? If we're being quite honest, at that point you were quite certain that things would turn out differently, that the defendant would shoot, and that is precisely the gamble that you took.
I can only repeat...
There is no need, it's already clear. It was not a calculation of 164 lives against 70,000 lives.
That is enough. The witness is not the accused. I move to dismiss the witness.
I will put it another way. Mr. Lauterbach, imagine there was no rapid reaction force.
This is getting confusing now.
Just imagine that for a moment.
All right.
And all you had were the terrorist words on the radio. What would you have done then?
I don't know. Now I get it. You think I would have
ordered
the stadium to be cleared? But that's a completely different situation.
Is it?
I mean, I think
Thank
that...
you. I have no further questions for the witness.
But...
Counsel, any questions for the defendant? Witness, excuse me.
Only 3?
Go ahead.
Were you yourself responsible for evacuating the stadium?
No.
Was the defendant responsible for evacuating the stadium?
Of course not.
Was the stadium full as Lufthansa aircraft approached, and could the defendant do anything to change that?
No.
Thank you. That should be made clear. No further questions.
Then you are discharged as a witness, Mr. Lauterbach. The court thanks you for your testimony.
Excuse me. Where do I have the form for witness confrontation? Today's my day off.
There you are. Section 332B. It's down the corner of the door.
Thank you very much.
Now, counsel, is your client prepared to answer further questions from the court?
Yes.
Mr. Koch.
I'll try.
Good. Then please step forward and take the stand a little bit here, easier to carry that way. Of course, you can pause at any time during your answers to discuss with your defense counsel.
Fine.
We will start with some biographical details. Mr. Koch, you're your parents' first child.
Yes, I have one sister who is 3 years younger.
What are your parents' professions?
My father was also in the Army. After reunification, he became a staff officer at the press department in the Ministry of Defense. My mother is a bookseller. After I was born, she stayed at home. She was a housewife and mother.
You were born in Freiburg and attended school there.
Yes, kindergarten, elementary, and charter school, all in Freiburg.
I have your school transcript. You attained the top marks in all of your classes, and your class teacher adds that you got the highest mark in mathematics in all of the state of Baden-Württemberg.
That is correct.
What were your interests outside of school?
Physics. Every year I used to enter Young Scientist of the Year.
And one year you even won second prize.
Yes, that's right. Apart from that, I played a lot of sports, especially football and track and field.
Would it be fair to say that school and learning came easily to you?
Yes.
And your childhood and youth were enjoyable?
I would say they were happy, yes.
Let us come to your choice of profession. Was it actually your choice to become a fighter pilot, or was it your father's?
It's true, my father did also want to be a fighter pilot.
And?
He didn't make it.
I see.
I always wanted to join the Air Force. When I was a child, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. It was all I could think about. I used to have posters of the planes on my bedroom wall.
What made you interested in them?
I found it fascinating. The dream of flying, the speed, the precision of the planes.
As soon as you left school, when you were 18, you applied for a training position.
I was invited to attend the Officer Candidate Assessment Center in Cologne, where I took an aptitude test. That lasted 3 days. Afterwards, I was examined to check whether I was medically and psychologically fit and had the psychomotor skills necessary for the service. In October, 2 months after I left school, I entered the service in Fürstenfeldbruck.
What did that consist of?
During the first year I completed my officer candidate training, I was promoted to the rank of ensign. I received my commission. For the next 25 months, I went through basic and advanced training as a pilot.
And where did you do that?
In the United States, to be precise, in Goodyear, Arizona. Then I was trained as a fighter pilot in Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas, 15 months.
What does one learn?
Essentially, flying. There's simulator and theoretical-based training for about 300 flying hours. After that section of the training is complete, you are licensed to fly military aircraft.
And then?
Then I had to familiarize myself with the flying conditions in Germany.
Oh, are they so very different?
The topography and weather conditions are different. It's also much more complicated moving about through European airspace if you think about how many borders we have and the number of flights here.
I see. Did you sign up for 16 years as a regular soldier, right at the beginning?
Terms of service aren't set out that way. One signs up in stages according to one's level of training.
I have your Army personnel file here. You have received the best appraisals, and on every occasion you were, and I quote, unreservedly recommended for
What you
promotion.
need to understand is the proportion of people who apply to join the Air Force who actually end up in the cockpit of a fighter jet is 1 in 10,000. Even among the trained pilots, only 1 in 10 will ever fly the Eurofighter.
So it's a rigorous selection process.
In this country, there are more chairmen of public companies and heart surgeons than there are fighter pilots.
Let us come to the events of the 26th of May. Did you follow the statement made by the witness, Lieutenant Colonel Lauterbach?
Of course.
And in your view, did his testimony represent the sequence of events accurately?
Yes.
They match your recollection?
Completely.
Good. Would you describe for us the minutes before the Lufthansa plane had been shot down from your personal point of view?
The diversion and warning shots produced no visible reaction from the captain of the Lufthansa plane, as you have heard. A couple of minutes later, we received the order from the DC not to shoot.
From the witness, Lieutenant Colonel Lauterbach?
Yes, that's right. So there was nothing else we could do other than fly alongside the plane. We repeatedly attempted to make contact by radio and visually, but without success.
The witness, Lieutenant Colonel Lauterbach, told us that you had questioned the order not to shoot.
That's correct. I checked twice with the command center to see whether the order to shoot had not been given after all. I knew the Lufthansa plane was only a couple of minutes from the stadium.
What did you think in that moment?
That's hard to explain.
Well, if we have time, please, try.
What you need to understand is our entire training process, the complicated selection procedures, the courses, the years of physical conditioning, the appraisals by our superiors, and so forth, all of it has only one objective. In the most difficult and testing circumstances, we have to hold our nerve. Our job is to assess danger quickly and precisely. That's what we're trained to do.
I understand.
And in that moment, while we were flying alongside the Lufthansa plane, the worst situation we can encounter in peacetime occurred. I know every pilot has thought about it hundreds of times. We've discussed it amongst ourselves, with our families, our friends, our superiors, our law lecturers. I know every pilot has thought about it hundreds of times.
It's not a combat mission.
Well, that's just it. The civilians on that plane, they're civilians. We're supposed to be protecting them.
But what did you think?
I considered whether I was disobeying an order to save tens of thousands of people by killing hundreds of them. If you're asking me what was going through my mind exactly in that 1 second, I thought about my wife and son. Innards.
Innards.
That's my word for it.
Uh-huh.
I thought about death. How everything in my life was now going to change. That's what I thought.
What did you do?
I slipped back behind the Lufthansa plane, so we were now flying slightly behind the civilian aircraft, a little above it. I let go of the sidewinder. I have no memory of saying there is no alternative. I only heard that for the first time afterwards. My lawyer played me the tape. It's strange how you can forget something like that.
When you fired, that is, when you activated the sidewinder, did you know what the consequences of your actions would be?
Did I know I'd be put in prison?
No. No. Was it clear to you that by shooting the plane, you would destroy the plane and kill the passengers?
Of course.
What happened exactly?
When I fired?
Yes, what happened to the airplane?
The Sidewinder's infrared heat seeker locked onto the right engine of the civilian aircraft. That is where the missile hit. Precisely, the kerosene in the wing exploded. This caused the wing to detach itself from the fuselage. Along with the wing, the air current was also lost.
And then?
The aircraft turned.
It turned?
It rotated. It was now flying on its back, so to speak. It's easy to explain technically.
Yes, all right, and then?
The heat from the explosion caused several sections of the plane's outer skin to melt. 4 passengers slipped out through these openings.
Precisely 4.
At least 4, that's how many I could see, along with luggage, bags, that sort of thing. The interior of the plane was on fire, the plastic melted, the left wing exploded, and the plane crashed.
What did you do?
We turned around and flew back to base. There we were arrested.
We?
Initially, yes, my fellow officer too. I immediately made a statement.
Good. Let's go back again. Were you able to see the terrorists at any time? Could you tell what they were doing?
No.
And the other passengers, what did you see?
What am I supposed to have seen?
Were the passengers trying to enter the cockpit, for example?
No.
Could you see the passengers standing in the aisle?
No, I didn't see that.
You acted against the explicit orders of your superior.
Yes, I did.
Why?
Because I thought it was right. I wasn't prepared to let 70,000 people die.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Koch? Prosecutor.
Following on from the presiding judge's question, would you have been able to see whether the passengers were attempting to enter the cockpit?
It was foggy.
And?
I couldn't see anything through the windows of the civilian aircraft.
And later?
You mean when the plane was on fire?
Yes.
No, everything was full of smoke.
So you were not able to see whether the people thrown out of the plane were sitting in their seats, standing in the aisle, or had been in the process of trying to enter the cockpit?
No.
Prosecutor, I really don't know where these questions are meant to lead.
Are you objecting to my question?
I simply want to know what it is you are asking.
Either make a formal objection or don't interrupt me anymore.
Please. Let us calm down. This is a stressful trial. Would you like to make an objection to the state prosecutor's question? At the moment, I can't see why.
Fine.
So you can't rule it out?
What?
That the passengers had been in the process of trying to break into the cockpit.
I can't rule it out.
You can't rule it out? Great. On another matter...
What do you mean by great? Are we going to comment on all the defendant's answers now?
Your Honor, I cannot exercise my right to cross-examination like this.
Counsel, I must agree with the prosecutor. If you wish to object to something, please do so for me. If not, then please make no further objections to her question.
Mr. Koch, I too have read your personal file. During your training process, you took a particular interest in matters of law. In light of this, would you be prepared to give more precise reasons for your decision?
I gave a lecture to young fighter pilots on the nature of the Federal Constitutional Court's ruling. I presume that is in the file?
Yes, that's right. There is a note of it. Then I ask you, what is your
Understanding?
understanding?
I have to interrupt. You know that we do not question the defendant on matters of law. We investigate the facts. That is also why I did not ask Mr. Koch any further questions.
Excuse me, please. Not only do I regard the state prosecutor's question as admissible, I find it essential. If we are to decide on my client's guilt, we have to understand his motivation. It is of relevance how Mr. Koch considered his legal position. As we have heard, he made his decision anything but lightly.
Ladies and gentlemen, judges, the defense counsel points out that his client had considered his legal position and ought to be questioned about this. In this particular case, his argument has some merit. We, like all modern states, have a law of decision on guilt. We punish the defendant based on his or her personal guilt. Earlier provisions of the law took the deed alone to be decisive. Anyone who killed would themselves be killed. Why the crime had been committed was irrelevant. Now, however, we want to understand this why. We want to be able to comprehend what can have motivated someone to break the law. Did he kill to enrich himself out of jealousy, out of pleasure in killing, or have entirely different motives. Possibly even ones with which we would agree. Our case today is such that the defendant's motives are evidently closely connected to his notion of the law. So, we should hear his thoughts. Very well, especially with his questions. Prosecutor, please go on.
Mr. Koch, if I understand you correctly, you acted quite deliberately contrary to the ruling of the Federal Constitutional Court.
Yes.
You know, and this is something you would have learned during your training, you may only contravene an order if that order goes against the law.
I am aware of that.
And you knew that as part of the powers of the state, you are bound by the decisions of the Federal Constitutional Court?
Basically, yes.
Basically?
The question is whether... I think the Federal Constitutional Court's ruling is wrong.
Can you explain that to us?
Yes, the question is whether the killing of non-participants is permissible in an extreme
But
case.
the Federal Constitutional Court ruled
Yes,
against
but what
that.
matters is the fact that on one side you have 164 passengers on the plane, and on the other there are 70,000 in the stadium. When the figures are so disproportionate, it's impossible not to weigh one side against the other.
If I understand you correctly, then you believe that the larger number of spectators in the stadium justifies killing the passengers?
Yes.
So you do weigh one life against another?
No, not one individual life against another individual life. I just think it was right to kill 164 people in order to save 70,000.
I see. Do you fundamentally believe that every human life is of equal value?
Of course.
However, protecting an individual life may be abandoned if that means saving several other lives.
Yes.
Would you imagine, please, a man who is admitted to hospital because he has broken his arm? Apart from this, he is in excellent health. In this hospital, there is also a whole slew of patients urgently awaiting transplants. It is their only hope. According to your argument, then, the doctors would be entitled to kill the man with the broken arm on the spot and harvest his organs.
No, of course they wouldn't.
Why not?
Exceptions can only be made for large amounts of people.
So 4 to 1 is not enough as far as you're concerned?
No, definitely not.
See. Is 100 to 1 better, 1,000 to 1, 10,000 to 1? Where exactly do you draw the line?
I can't say. One would have to decide case by case.
Not one. You mean you would have to decide case by case?
Me?
Yes, you. Isn't it true that with your decision, you're putting yourself in what is, to put it loosely, a godlike position? You alone are now allowed to decide the proportion required for someone to carry on living? You decide who lives and who dies?
I don't...
You see, if every human life is of equal value, as you yourself believe, then isn't it impossible to weigh lives against each other by number? Wouldn't that go against this very principle?
The passengers on that plane only had a few moments to live anyways.
That is an completely different argument.
The situation is that the plane would have exploded in the stadium. Even if I had not fired, they all would have been killed.
Let me ask again. Is the length of the life remaining the sole determining factor now?
Yes.
In this case, you alone are setting the time frame. Your notion is that people with a low life expectancy are no longer worth protecting. How much longer are you willing to give them? 5 minutes?
I don't know.
Less? More? Are they allowed to ring up their relatives and say goodbye? A lot of passengers in the New York attacks did this.
You've got to see this in practical terms.
In practical terms?
I only shot that plane down at the last possible moment. I couldn't have waited any longer.
That doesn't change anything, does it? Think of our example. What if the man in hospital hasn't just broken his arm but is also mortally ill and only has a few hours left to live? According to your argument, then, you don't wait for him to die. You can kill him straight away and harvest his organs.
No, of course not.
Why not?
Because a few hours is very different from a few minutes, and besides, the mortally ill patient in your example is innocent.
Innocent? But aren't the 164 passengers just as innocent?
Not entirely, no.
You are going to have to explain that.
Passengers on that airplane placed themselves in danger purely by boarding the aircraft. Nowadays, it is clear to everyone that there is always a risk of being hijacked. Every airline passenger knows they could become the victim of a terrorist attack. They see it everywhere. Think of security checks in airports. The threat is obvious to everyone.
So you believe that by buying a plane ticket, the passengers consented to being killed?
Potentially killed.
You don't think this is completely out of touch, that it is entirely unrealistic?
That's how our life is.
What about the children on the airplane?
Children?
There were children on the airplane. Did they consent to being killed too?
Yes, their parents did on their behalf.
Interesting. And if I were to follow your reasoning, weren't the people in the stadium also taking such a risk?
I don't understand.
In the world as you see it, everyone is aware of the dangers of being in a place where crowds congregate, on an underground train, for example, or at a rock concert, a live screening, or in a football stadium. You can take it further and say anyone who goes to the cinema or to the nightclub or to the department store is placing themselves in danger and thereby consenting to be killed. There have been attacks in all of these places.
That's not what I meant.
So what did you mean?
Passengers in airplanes are in particular danger.
In particular danger, oh well.
You know, you've spent this whole time talking about emotions.
What do you mean by that?
You've got to see this from a different perspective.
Do I?
The passengers on that plane had become part of a weapon, a terrorist weapon. That's tragic, but that's the only realistic way of looking at it. The terrorist turned that entire plane into his weapon, and it is that weapon that I have to fight against.
Mr. Koch, you are an intelligent man, but aren't you getting carried away just now?
How?
You are denying that the passengers are still people.
I beg your pardon?
You are turning the passengers into things, into objects, and you claim that they have become part of a weapon.
That's what they were.
Is there anything human left of them as far as you're concerned? Are they still people if we can only see them as being part of a weapon?
You know, maybe...
Doesn't being human have to mean a lot more than that?
Maybe you can afford these nice ideas, but I'm up there. I'm responsible. I can't allow myself to reflect on the nature of human existence. I've got to make a decision.
Mr. Koch, would you like to take a break?
No, thank you. Prosecutor, if you're going to go this far, maybe I should explain to you how a soldier has to think. I swore an oath.
Yes?
To faithfully serve our country and to bravely defend the rights and freedoms of our people. I know it off by heart.
I don't understand.
What that oath means is that a soldier must sacrifice his life if it will defend his country.
That is true.
What that oath also means is that nothing other than the state will waive the life of a soldier against the dangers threatening the collective. That's how I've always understood the oath, at any rate.
What are you trying to say?
What I'm trying to say is that the state does not exclude people from being deliberately sacrificed. To sacrifice for the collective, or if you prefer, for the values of the collective.
But we're talking about soldiers. A soldier can always be sacrificed.
Absolutely. That's how it's always been throughout history. A soldier has a duty to protect the community from harm, even at the risk of his own life. So there, too, you weigh one life against another. The life of a soldier against the life of a civilian.
That is a very interesting argument, Mr. Koch, but there is one key difference between your duties as a soldier and the state killing innocent passengers.
And that is?
As a soldier of this country, one is not killed by our state, but by soldiers of a foreign state.
But I'm not free to choose whether I'm put in deadly danger either. I'm forced to do so by obeying orders.
No, you volunteered for this service. You signed up, and you knew the risks when you did so.
Maybe we're being too theoretical here.
Are we?
The key thing is something else.
Well, we'd like to hear what it is.
As a soldier, I'm trained to think about threats. How do I protect the country? How do I safeguard our population? That's my job.
Go on.
Have you ever stopped to think about what the Federal Constitutional Court's ruling actually means?
Where are you going?
I mean what it means in practice for all of us.
Yes?
When you're up there training for a combat mission, the only way you can win is if you put yourself in your opponent's shoes. You have to anticipate what they are going to do.
I can see that.
So if you do that, if you think about what the Federal Constitutional Court's ruling actually means, it'll be obvious to you what a terrorist would do.
Which is?
It's quite simple. They'll always use innocent people. Don't you understand? The second they do that, the state can't defend itself. We've been left at the mercy of terrorists. The court has made us helpless. The state is capitulating. We've given up. You've accused me here of killing the 164 people on board. You reproach me for not following this absurd decision as was my duty to do so. Well, prosecutor, you're right. I didn't do that. Because that decision undermines us all. It is the opposite of what I have been trained to do.
Mr. Koch, are you still convinced that you acted correctly?
Yes.
You believe that the people on the plane had to sacrifice themselves because reasons of state demanded it?
Yes.
And you would do it again?
Yes.
Is there no other possible course of action?
None.
Then, Mr. Koch, I have only one more question for you. Would you have fired if your wife had been on that plane?
What?
Your wife and your son, what if they had been on that plane? Would you have killed them too?
What is the point of this question? This is outrageous!
No, what is outrageous isn't the question, it's your interruption.
I cannot believe this line of questioning.
Counsel, let us calm down, okay? So you are aware that it is our task to investigate whether the defendant's statement stands up. Or if it's
not our jobs to
Wait. I'm not going to ask myself that question. I can't.
What can't you do?
Every answer is wrong.
You are right. Because it is a matter of life. I have no further questions for the defendant.
Counsel, do you have any more questions for your client?
No.
Fine. Then you may return to your seat next to counsel, Mr. Koch. So if I hear no objection, I would now propose to get the plaintiff as a witness. Mrs. Meiser, you are a judge plaintiff in this case as well as a witness. We would like to hear you. Would you please take a seat in the witness's chair? Mrs. Meiser, I'd like to have your first name confessed for the record. What is your first name?
Franziska,
And your age last birthday?
34.
Where you live?
In Munich. It's Truderinger.
No, alright, that's okay, thank you. You don't need the address. Maybe it's sufficient. What is your profession?
I'm a nurse.
And are you working at the moment?
Yes, at the University
Are
Hospital.
you related to the defendant, either by birth or by marriage?
No.
Mrs. Meiser, as with every witness here, I'm obliged to instruct you. You're obliged to tell the truth here. You are not allowed to omit anything or add anything. False testimony is punished severely. Do you understand this?
Yes.
Instruction completed. Mrs. Meiser, your husband was one of the passengers who died aboard the Lufthansa.
No.
He wasn't?
He didn't die. They killed him.
Please tell us about the day that it happened, and we can pause at any time during the proceedings if you so wish.
Well, it was like this. That morning, my husband rang up and said what time he'd be coming back from Berlin. He worked for Siemens. That day, he'd flown to Berlin in the morning for a meeting.
I see.
I'd just done 2 night shifts at the hospital, so I had the day off. I wanted to pick him up in the car. I used to do that sometimes. You know, the airport is such a long way out, and a taxi's very expensive, and he doesn't like getting the train. Then on the arrivals board, it just said, delayed.
Were you alone at the airport?
No, what do you mean alone?
Had you taken anyone with you?
Oh, right, no. Our daughter was at home, my mother was looking after her.
You were alone.
Yes.
What happened after you had read on the arrivals board that the flight was delayed?
Then I got the text.
The text?
Yes.
Mrs. Meiser? What did the text say?
Sorry, I'll read it to you. The police confiscated my phone. I still haven't got it back. But I wrote the message down. We've been hijacked by terrorists. We're trying to get into the cockpit. Don't be afraid. We will make it. I love you. That's all. There's no more. Of course, I wrote straight back, but there was no answer.
What did you write?
I think it was, oh God, what's happened, or something like that.
Can you tell us the time of the text message?
Which one?
From your husband.
Yes, wait a minute. "7:48 and 12 seconds. I copied it out from my phone.
When did you copy it?
Right at the end, when the policeman told me he needed my phone.
What happened after you had received the text?
I immediately showed my phone to a policeman. I told him my husband would never joke about that sort of thing. The policeman was very young. He still had acne. I remember that very clearly. He alerted somebody straight away. I was taken to a room somewhere behind the security desks. Everyone was suddenly very agitated. I could tell. And now I started getting really scared. People were coming in and going out again the whole time. It was in and out the whole time.
When did they confirm that the plane had been hijacked?
They didn't. Not to begin with. An older official came in and tried to calm me down, but I'm a nurse. You see, I know all about how to talk to patients, and that's exactly what he sounded like. I didn't believe him.
And then?
Eventually, another policeman came in together with a woman. The woman wasn't in uniform. The policeman, who was called Haller or something like that, sat down next to me. He spoke in a very calm voice, but that only made it worse, you know, someone talking calmly like that. He told me that the plane had been hijacked and then shot down, but now they were all looking for survivors.
Who is the woman?
A psychologist. She asked me if I needed any help, but I didn't want any help. I had no idea what could possibly help me. My little daughter was at home, lying in her bed, not knowing about any of it. She was the one I kept thinking about the whole time, not my husband, but my daughter.
What did you do?
What did I do? Nothing.
What happened next?
I can't really remember anymore. The policeman with the acne took me back to the arrivals hall. He asked whether I wanted him to take me to my car or if someone would come and collect me. I just wanted to be left alone. I sat down on a bench in the arrivals hall and watched the sliding doors. It was really strange. I couldn't cry. There were loads of police all over the airport. It was complete chaos. I didn't listen to the announcements. I just sat there on the bench. I didn't even call home. I don't know if you can imagine this. I was waiting for him, watching the sliding doors, still believing he was going to come walking through them. It is so cruel to lose someone so suddenly and not be able to say goodbye.
I think we should take a break now.
No, please don't. Can I ask something?
Yes.
The police never told me. Did the passengers get into the cockpit?
I beg your pardon?
Did they manage to get into the cockpit?
We don't know.
But that's important. If they had, they could have stopped the terrorists, couldn't they? Then there would have been no need to shoot the plane down, would there?
That is what we are trying to ascertain in this trial, Mrs. Meiser.
Yes.
You went to the police again later?
No?
For the court, page 96, volume 14 of the main files. According to this, you were there once more on the 4th of September.
Oh, that's what you mean.
Do you remember now?
Yes, I got a letter from the police. All the families went to Garching. We were taken to a big hall that belonged to the army.
And what was there?
That's where all their things were. The personal effects from the wreckage. They'd laid them all out on tables, these long metal tables.
Was anything returned to you there?
Just his left shoe. It's not that important.
Perhaps it is. Please, tell us about the shoe.
I looked at everything carefully, along with all the other people. But there were so many things there. Suitcases, watches, briefcases, and so forth. But nothing of my husband's. And then right at the end, at the very back in the last row, I found it. His left shoe. It was in good condition, no scratches, no blood, nothing. You see, my husband had always really looked after his shoes. He always bought expensive shoes. His favorites were horse leather. He said that they might be more expensive, but they'd last longer. I took his left shoe off the table. I had to sign a form for it. And then they wanted to wrap it up in a bag, but I took it just as it was. It sat next to me in the passenger seat all the way home, that shoe. You see, Your Honor, my daughter is 7 years old now. And at the funeral, she asked me what was in the coffin if Daddy wasn't there. And I didn't know what to say. But she's right, we buried an empty coffin. You know, my daughter thought that was really stupid, praying beside an empty coffin. I couldn't pray at all. And then I went and buried the shoe in the woods on my own. I don't know if that was right, burying the shoe. I'm sorry, that probably doesn't make much sense to you. I just don't understand.
Yes, Mrs. Meiser.
It's hard for my daughter. You know, you just can't explain it. She told me she's already forgotten what Daddy used to smell like, his smell. Can I have my phone back?
I beg your pardon?
I'd like to have that text. Can you understand that?
Yes, I do understand. Your telephone will be returned to you at the end of the trial. We still need it for evidence. I'm very, very sorry.
That's what everyone said.
What?
I'm sorry, it doesn't mean anything when people say that.
I can't give it to you.
Yes.
Are there any further questions for the joint plaintiff and witness? Mrs. Meiser, thank you. You are now discharged as a witness. If you wish, you are welcome to follow the remainder of the trial. I will now inform you of the defendant's criminal record. There are no entries. Mr. Koch has no previous convictions. If there are no further questions, motions, or proposals, then that concludes the evidence. Prosecutor, do you need any time to prepare?
Yes, I do need a short break.
Okay. Fine, then let's adjourn for 10 minutes. Call everyone again in 10 minutes.